3 people saw the man sitting helplessly beside the road. The first saw him and kept walking. The second came closer and did the same. But the third man stopped. And what he did next would cost him something. Something he could have kept for himself. Something he had worked for. Something the stranger could never repay. But there was one thing nobody knew yet. Why would a complete stranger sacrifice his own time, resources, and comfort for someone he had never met? The answer began on a lonely road between Jerusalem and Jericho. A traveler was sitting helplessly beside the road. His clothes were torn. His belongings were gone. His body was weak. And he had no idea whether anyone would come to help him. He had been attacked by robbers and left alone on the road. Now all he could do was wait. Then he heard footsteps. His eyes opened. Someone was coming. For the first time that day, hope returned to his heart. Maybe God had heard him. Maybe this stranger would stop. Maybe he would not have to face this difficult moment alone. The footsteps came closer. The traveler gathered the little strength he had left. "Please." The approaching man stopped. He looked directly at him. The traveler waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Then the man stepped away and continued walking. The traveler's hope faded. But he wasn't prepared for what happened next. Another person came. Another pair of footsteps. Another opportunity. Another hope. And once again, he was left behind. 2 people had seen his situation. 2 people had the opportunity to help. Neither stopped. But then from far down the road, something else appeared. A man. A donkey. A stranger. And this stranger belonged to a people the traveler had been taught to keep his distance from. The man came closer. He saw the traveler. He saw his condition. He saw that help was needed. And then he did something nobody expected. He stopped. But stopping was only the beginning. Because that stranger was about to sacrifice his own time, resources, and comfort to help someone who could never repay him. And thousands of years later, people would still remember the question at the heart of this story. Who is my neighbor? The day everything changed. Before anyone remembered him as the man beside the road, he was simply a traveler. A man with somewhere to go. A destination in his mind. A future he expected to reach. He had begun his journey from Jerusalem, traveling toward Jericho along a road that descended through rugged and isolated country. The morning had started normally. Jerusalem was alive behind him. Voices filled the streets. Merchants called out to customers. Animals moved through the busy paths. People hurried about their daily responsibilities. But the farther he traveled from the city, the quieter everything became. The sounds of Jerusalem disappeared behind him. The road narrowed. The landscape became dry and rocky. Large stones surrounded sections of the path, creating quiet places where travelers could easily lose sight of one another. It was a road where people learned to remain alert. Robbers were known to target travelers along the route. And although the traveler knew the road had dangers, he had no reason to believe that this journey would become different from any other. He continued walking. His footsteps moved steadily across the dusty ground. He thought about reaching his destination. He thought about the people waiting for him. He thought about everything he would do once the journey was over. He did not know that before the day ended, his plans would change completely. Suddenly, movement appeared between the rocks. The traveler stopped. He turned. Nothing. He looked ahead. The road appeared empty. Perhaps it was only his imagination. So he continued. A few more steps. Then suddenly, several men appeared from the surrounding area. The traveler was caught completely off guard. They took his belongings. His journey was interrupted. He tried to protect what he had, but there were too many of them. Within moments, the traveler was left sitting beside the road, without his possessions and without anyone around to help him. The men disappeared. Silence returned. The traveler remained there. He tried to gather himself. He tried to stand. But his body was too weak. He sat back down. The bright sun continued moving across the sky. Time passed. And the traveler realized something frightening. Nobody knew where he was. His family didn't know. His friends didn't know. No one knew that he needed help. If someone didn't come soon, he might remain there for a very long time. He looked down the road. Nothing. He looked in the opposite direction. Nothing. So he began to call softly. Help. His voice disappeared into the open landscape. He tried again. Please. Still nothing. Then suddenly, footsteps. His eyes opened. Someone was coming. The traveler looked toward the sound. A man appeared in the distance. From his clothing, the traveler recognized him as a priest. And suddenly, something changed inside him. Hope. Perhaps this man would help. Perhaps he would bring him somewhere safe. Perhaps he would give him water. Perhaps he would simply stay beside him until someone else arrived. The priest came closer. 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 Then he noticed the traveler. He stopped. Their eyes met. The traveler tried to speak. Please. The priest looked at him. Then he looked along the road. He hesitated. And instead of approaching, he moved toward the other side of the road. The traveler watched. The priest continued on his journey. His footsteps became quieter, then disappeared completely. The traveler remained where he was. He had hoped the first person who saw him would be the person who helped him. But that didn't happen. Still, he waited. Time passed again. Then another person appeared. Another traveler. Another possibility. The man was a Levite. The traveler noticed him approaching. Perhaps this time would be different. The Levite saw him. He came close enough to understand that the man needed assistance. But after looking at him, he continued on his way. Once again, the road became quiet. The traveler lowered his head. 2 people had seen him. 2 people had continued their journey. His hope was beginning to disappear. Then something unexpected happened. A sound came from far down the road. Not footsteps. The steady movement of a donkey. The traveler slowly lifted his head. A man was approaching. A stranger. The traveler could not yet know what kind of man he was. He could not know what he was thinking. He could not know whether this stranger would stop. But as the man came closer, the traveler recognized something that made the moment even more surprising. He was a Samaritan. The traveler knew the history between their communities. They were not people who naturally trusted one another. This was not the person he expected to come to his aid. Yet the Samaritan saw him. He slowed down. He looked at the traveler. Then he looked again. The Samaritan could have continued. He had his own destination. His own responsibilities. His own journey. But something made him stop. He came down from his donkey. He walked toward the traveler. And for the first time that day, someone did more than notice his situation. Someone chose to care. The Samaritan knelt beside him. He did not ask whether the traveler could repay him. He did not ask whether they belonged to the same community. He did not ask what he would receive in return. He simply saw someone who needed help. And he decided to help. But the Samaritan had no idea that his decision was about to become much bigger than one moment on one lonely road. Because kindness was going to require a sacrifice. And the question was no longer whether he would stop. The question was how far he was willing to go. The story was only beginning. The stranger who stopped. The Samaritan stood beside the traveler. For a moment, he simply looked at him. The man was exhausted. His belongings were gone. His journey had been completely disrupted. And there was no one else around. The Samaritan could have walked away. After all, the traveler was a stranger. Someone from a community that did not normally share much friendship with his own. But compassion does something unusual. It makes us see beyond the labels people carry. The Samaritan did not see a Jew. He did not see an enemy. He saw a human being who needed help. So he knelt down. He offered what he had. He carefully attended to the man's immediate needs and gave him water. The traveler looked at him with surprise. He had already watched 2 people continue their journey. Now someone who had every reason to keep his distance had chosen to come closer. The Samaritan helped him onto his donkey. Then he began the difficult journey toward an inn. It was no longer just the Samaritan's journey. Now he was carrying someone else's burden too. And every step toward the inn meant more time, more effort, more responsibility. But he kept going. Because kindness is easy when it costs nothing. The real test begins when helping someone requires a sacrifice. And the Samaritan had not yet reached the greatest cost. The price of mercy. By the time they reached the inn, the traveler could barely believe what had happened. Hours earlier, he had wondered whether anyone would stop. Now a stranger had brought him somewhere safe. The Samaritan did not simply leave him at the door. He stayed. He made arrangements for the man's care. He gave the innkeeper what was needed for his immediate needs and promised to cover any additional expense required for his recovery. Then came the moment when he could have walked away. He had already done more than most people would have expected. He had stopped. He had helped. He had carried the man's burden. He had given his own resources. Surely, that was enough. But the Samaritan did something even greater. He refused to make kindness conditional on repayment. The traveler had nothing to offer him. No reward. No promise. No guarantee that he would ever see him again. Yet the Samaritan helped anyway. And perhaps that is what made his kindness so powerful. He didn't help because the traveler could give something back. He helped because the traveler needed someone to care. Then the Samaritan prepared to continue his journey. The traveler watched him leave. He still did not know the stranger's full story. He only knew one thing. When everyone else had seen his need and continued walking, one person had stopped. But this act of kindness was about to become part of a much greater lesson. A lesson that would challenge the way people understood love, compassion, and even the meaning of the word neighbor. And the next moment would reveal why Jesus told this story in the first place. The question that changed everything. The story could have ended there. A wounded traveler had received help. A stranger had shown compassion. A difficult journey had become a little easier. But Jesus was not telling the story simply to make people admire the Samaritan. There was a deeper reason. And it began with a question. A religious teacher had approached Jesus and asked what he needed to do to inherit eternal life. Jesus directed him back to what was already written in the law. The man answered correctly. Love God completely. And love your neighbor as yourself. But then he asked another question. A question that sounded simple, but carried something deeper. And who is my neighbor? That was when Jesus began telling the story. He spoke of a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. He spoke of the trouble that found him on the road. He spoke of a priest who saw him, a Levite who saw him, and a Samaritan who saw him too. But there was one difference. The first two saw the man's need. The Samaritan responded to it. And that difference changed everything. Because Jesus was showing them that love cannot be measured only by words. Sometimes love looks like stopping. Sometimes it looks like giving. Sometimes it looks like carrying someone else's burden when you already have your own. And sometimes kindness means helping someone who may never be able to repay you. The question was no longer simply, who is my neighbor? The story was turning the question around. Who are you willing to become a neighbor to? And suddenly, the road between Jerusalem and Jericho was no longer just a road. It had become a mirror. A mirror that forced everyone listening to look at their own hearts. Because somewhere in life, every person will meet someone who needs help. Someone who is struggling. Someone who is overlooked. Someone whose situation is inconvenient. And in that moment, there will always be a choice. Walk past. Or stop. Jesus was about to make the answer impossible to misunderstand. But the greatest lesson was still waiting at the end of the story. When kindness costs something, the Samaritan could have kept walking. No one would have blamed him. The traveler was not his friend. He was not family. He could not repay the kindness. And yet, the Samaritan stopped. He gave his time. He gave what he had. He interrupted his own journey to carry someone else's burden. That was the cost of his kindness. And perhaps that was the part Jesus wanted everyone to understand. Love is easy to talk about when it costs nothing. It is easy to say, I care. But real compassion becomes visible when caring requires something from us. A little time. A little patience. A little sacrifice. A little inconvenience. The Samaritan did not ask whether the traveler deserved his help. He simply saw someone in need and responded. And that is what made the story so powerful. The people listening to Jesus may have expected the hero to be someone like themselves. Instead, The person who demonstrated mercy was the one they least expected. The story challenged their assumptions. It challenged their pride. It challenged their definition of who deserved compassion. Because kindness does not begin with asking, "What can this person do for me?" It begins with asking, "What can I do for this person?" And then Jesus brought the story to its final moment. He looked at the man who had asked the question. And suddenly, there was nowhere left to hide. The lesson was no longer about a traveler on an ancient road. It was about everyone listening. It was about every person who would ever see someone struggling and have the opportunity to respond. The question was no longer, "Who is my neighbor?" The answer had become much deeper. Anyone whose life crosses your path and needs your mercy. Go and do likewise. The story ended with a simple command. But it was a command powerful enough to challenge an entire way of thinking. Jesus asked which of the three travelers had been a neighbor to the man who needed help. The answer was obvious. It was the one who showed mercy. The one who stopped. The one who cared. The one who acted. Then Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." Not simply, admire the Samaritan. Not simply, remember the story. Not simply, talk about kindness. Go and do likewise. Those words still speak today. Because the road may look different now, but people still find themselves beside lonely roads. Some are struggling quietly. Some are carrying burdens nobody can see. Some are waiting for someone to notice. And sometimes, we may be the person who crosses their path. We may not have everything. We may not be able to solve every problem. But kindness does not always require great resources. Sometimes it begins with a listening ear, a helping hand, a word of encouragement, a meal, a prayer, a little time, a simple act of compassion. The Samaritan did not change the entire world that day. He simply changed one person's day. And yet, that one act became a lesson that has traveled across generations. Because one person's kindness can become another person's reason to hope. One act of mercy can remind someone that they are not forgotten. And one decision to stop can change everything. So when you meet someone struggling, don't be too quick to look away. When someone needs encouragement, don't assume someone else will provide it. When you have the opportunity to show kindness, remember the stranger on that ancient road. Because you may never know how deeply your small act of compassion will affect another person's life. The road may be different. The people may be different. The circumstances may be different. But the lesson remains. Love God. Love your neighbor. Show mercy. And when kindness calls you to stop, go and do likewise. Final narration. The Good Samaritan's greatest gift was not what he gave. It was the fact that he stopped when everyone else kept moving. Because sometimes, kindness is not about having enough to give. It is about caring enough to share what you have. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the greatest reason for someone else to hope.